Some mistakes end with paperwork. Others make Washington pick up the phone. The blue and red lights sliced through the humid Virginia night, reflecting across the rain-soaked pavement like fractured glass. A quiet stretch of Interstate 95 had become strangely still, every passing driver slowing just enough to glance at the lone black SUV easing onto the shoulder. Inside, Naomi Brooks rested both hands on the steering wheel exactly where they could be seen. Her breathing remained steady, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. She had learned years ago that sometimes the safest thing a person could do was stay perfectly still and let the moment reveal itself. Officer Daniel Mercer stepped out of his patrol cruiser with the confidence of someone who believed his badge answered every question before they were even asked. His flashlight swept across the SUV, lingering just a second longer than necessary before climbing toward the driver's window. The silence between them felt heavier than the damp summer air. Naomi lowered her window halfway. "Good evening, officer," she said evenly. Mercer didn't return the greeting. His eyes moved from her face to the interior of the vehicle, searching not only for evidence, but for confirmation of assumptions he had already made. "License and registration," he said flatly. Naomi nodded once and reached slowly toward the center console. Every movement was deliberate, measured, almost rehearsed. The rain tapped gently against the windshield while the cruiser lights continued to pulse across the empty highway. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the horizon. Mercer watched every inch of her movement with growing suspicion. "Slow down," he snapped. "I don't know what you're reaching for." Naomi immediately stopped moving. "I'm reaching for my registration exactly where I told you it was." Her voice never rose. It never trembled. If anything, her calmness seemed to irritate him even more. A second patrol unit drove past without stopping, disappearing into the darkness ahead. Mercer leaned closer. "Step out of the vehicle." Naomi looked at him for a brief moment. "May I ask why?" His jaw tightened. "Because I said so." The words hung in the humid air. Drivers continued passing, some glancing over, others pretending not to notice. A young couple in a pickup slowed just enough for the passenger to quietly begin recording with a cell phone before continuing down the highway. Mercer noticed none of it. Naomi slowly unbuckled her seat belt and opened the door. She stepped onto the shoulder with empty hands visible, the drizzle settling across her dark jacket. She stood straight, saying nothing more. Mercer circled her vehicle, shining his flashlight through each window as though expecting the beam itself to uncover guilt. "You people always have a story," he muttered under his breath, barely loud enough for her to hear. Naomi didn't answer. Instead, she watched the steady rhythm of the flashing lights reflected across the wet asphalt. She had heard words like those before. Experience had taught her that arguments rarely changed minds already made up. Mercer returned, frustration growing because the vehicle looked exactly as ordinary as it should. No sudden movements, no raised voice, no obvious reason for the stop to become anything more. Yet something about her composure unsettled him. "Turn around," he ordered. Naomi met his eyes for the first time. There was no anger in hers, only quiet certainty. "Officer," she said softly, "you still have time to make a different decision." For a split second, the wind carried only the sound of distant traffic and falling rain. Mercer laughed once, short and dismissive. "Save the speeches." The flashing lights painted both of them in alternating blue and crimson as somewhere hundreds of miles away, inside a secure federal operations center in Washington, one unanswered call quietly became two. Naomi remained exactly where she stood, her hands visible, the light rain collecting across her sleeves while the flashing patrol lights washed the highway in alternating shades of blue and red. She did not glance toward the passing traffic or the drivers who had slowed to watch. Her attention stayed on Officer Daniel Mercer, whose confidence seemed to grow with every quiet second that passed. To him, silence looked like hesitation. To Naomi, silence had become another tool, one she had learned to trust during years of assignments where one careless word could destroy months of work. Earlier that evening, nearly 30 miles away, she had left a secure federal meeting in downtown Richmond, carrying nothing that revealed who she truly was. Her credentials remained locked inside a protected case beneath the cargo floor of her vehicle, inaccessible without multiple security procedures. The decision had not been accidental. Her assignment required complete discretion. Even routine encounters with local authorities were supposed to remain exactly that, routine. The fewer people who recognized her, the safer the investigation remained. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, several federal investigators were quietly tracking financial transfers connected to a corruption case that had stretched across multiple states. Naomi was one of only a handful of agents trusted with information that could expose people holding positions few citizens ever questioned. That responsibility demanded patience, discipline, and sometimes uncomfortable restraint. Mercer, however, knew none of that. He only saw a woman whose calm refusal to panic challenged the story he had already written in his mind. He circled the sport utility vehicle once again, stopping beside the rear bumper before shining his flashlight toward the license plate. Everything matched the registration system. The vehicle was properly insured. There were no outstanding warrants attached to the plate. Nothing justified the growing suspicion he seemed determined to prove. Yet instead of allowing the stop to end, he searched for another reason to continue. The drizzle slowly intensified, leaving tiny streams of water running across the pavement. The young couple who had recorded part of the encounter pulled into a nearby gas station just beyond the exit ramp, remaining close enough to keep watching from a distance. They could not hear every word, but they could see enough to sense that something about the encounter felt unnecessarily tense. Naomi quietly noticed the movement without turning her head. Witnesses often remembered details differently than cameras did, but both had a way of preserving moments people wished had disappeared. Mercer stepped closer once again, studying her expression as though expecting fear to appear at any second. Instead, he found composure that only deepened his frustration. "You are very calm," he remarked with unmistakable suspicion. Naomi answered with the same measured tone she had used from the beginning. Remaining calm usually helps everyone go home safely. For an instant, neither of them spoke. The rain softened. The distant traffic hummed through the humid night. Hundreds of miles away, inside a secure communications center in Washington, another encrypted alert quietly appeared beside Naomi Brooks's name. A supervisor frowned at the growing list of unanswered check-ins. 1 missed report could be explained. 2 demanded attention. 3 would change everything. Officer Daniel Mercer folded his arms as though the silence itself had become an insult. Every answer Naomi Brooks gave was measured, respectful, and brief, yet none of it seemed to satisfy him. The highway remained unusually quiet except for the steady rhythm of passing tires cutting through wet pavement. Rainwater glistened beneath the patrol lights, turning the shoulder into a ribbon of shifting blue and red reflections. Mercer took another slow look around the sport utility vehicle before stopping beside the driver's door once more. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. Naomi answered without hesitation. "A business meeting." "What kind of business?" "Professional business." Mercer frowned. "That is not much of an answer." Naomi looked directly at him, neither challenging nor avoiding his gaze. "It is the answer I am able to give." Something about those words settled into the air with unexpected weight. Mercer interpreted restraint as defiance. Naomi intended it only as honesty. She knew exactly how much she could disclose without compromising the people depending on her. Somewhere inside the vehicle, an encrypted communication device remained silent, its scheduled check-in already overdue. The secure system had been designed to protect sensitive operations, not to explain them during roadside conversations. That silence now carried consequences far beyond the dark highway. Mercer motioned toward the rear of the vehicle. "Open the cargo area." Naomi calmly replied, "I cannot grant access to secured property without proper legal authority." His expression hardened immediately. "So now you are refusing a lawful instruction?" "I am respectfully protecting property that is not mine to release," she answered. The distinction mattered to her. It did not matter to him. A cool breeze swept across the interstate, carrying the scent of fresh rain and warm asphalt. The cell phone recording from the nearby gas station continued quietly. The young woman holding the phone whispered to her boyfriend that the driver had remained calm the entire time. Neither of them understood why the stop kept growing longer when nothing appeared to justify it. Mercer requested additional information through his patrol computer, tapping impatiently against the steering wheel of his cruiser while waiting for the database to respond. The system returned the same result again. Valid registration. Valid driver's license. No active warrants. No stolen vehicle report. No immediate cause for escalation. He stared at the screen longer than necessary before stepping back outside. Instead of ending the encounter, he became even more determined to uncover something the computer had missed. Naomi noticed the change immediately. Experience had taught her that frustration often arrived just before poor decisions. She remembered instructors telling every new federal agent that composure was not measured when situations were easy. It was measured when someone else lost theirs first. She quietly repeated those words in her mind while watching Mercer approach once again. "Last chance," he said firmly. "Tell me what is really going on." Naomi answered with the same steady voice that had never wavered since the flashing lights first appeared behind her. "Officer, I have been truthful from the beginning." He searched her face for uncertainty and found none. That absence of fear only deepened his suspicion. Far away in Washington, the operations center no longer viewed the missed check-ins as a simple communications delay. "Hey!" Senior supervisor stood from the conference table and gave a single instruction that instantly changed the atmosphere inside the room. "Locate Agent Naomi Brooks immediately. Notify every necessary office. We are moving to priority response." The steady rain blurred the glow of the patrol lights until the entire highway seemed suspended between darkness and color. Officer Daniel Mercer took one slow step forward, his shoulders tense, convinced that the woman standing quietly before him was hiding something important. Naomi Brooks did not move. She kept her hands where they could be seen, her breathing controlled, her eyes calm despite the growing tension surrounding them. She had spent years preparing for unpredictable moments, but experience had also taught her that the greatest danger was not uncertainty. It was certainty built on false assumptions. Mercer pointed toward the front of the sport utility vehicle. "Move over there." Naomi complied without argument, walking exactly where he directed. Every movement remained slow and deliberate. The cell phone recording from the nearby gas station continued as more drivers eased past the scene, curiosity spreading through passing traffic even though no one knew what had started the encounter. The highway itself felt strangely silent, as though waiting for something neither officer nor driver could yet see. Mercer studied her face again. "You are making this much harder than it needs to be." Naomi answered quietly. "I have followed every instruction you have given." That response only seemed to deepen his frustration. He glanced once more toward the vehicle before reaching for equipment on his duty belt. His posture became noticeably more rigid, his voice sharper than before. "Do not make any sudden movements." Naomi remained exactly where she was. "I have no intention of doing that." For several long seconds, nothing happened except the sound of rainfall striking the pavement. The flashing lights reflected across the wet shoulder, while distant thunder rolled through the Virginia sky. Then, in a moment that stunned the small number of witnesses watching from afar, Mercer deployed his conducted energy device during the encounter. Naomi immediately lost her balance and went down onto the rain-soaked shoulder. The entire event unfolded within moments, leaving the nearby witnesses frozen in disbelief. The young woman recording from the gas station instinctively lowered her phone for a second before lifting it again, whispering, "She never even ran." Her boyfriend stared toward the highway without answering. Naomi remained composed despite the shock of what had just happened. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She simply looked up through the falling rain and spoke with remarkable calm. "Officer, this stop has already gone farther than it should have." Mercer interpreted her composure as stubbornness rather than discipline. He believed he still controlled the situation completely. What he could not see was the chain of consequences already beginning hundreds of miles away. Inside the Federal Operations Center in Washington, the priority response had accelerated. Secure communication specialists failed to reach Naomi through every authorized channel. A senior official compared the timeline against her scheduled route and immediately contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office responsible for the region. Within minutes, another secure call reached the Virginia State Police Command Center requesting assistance in locating a federal agent whose communications had unexpectedly stopped during an active assignment. No one inside that operations room knew exactly what had happened yet. They only knew that Agent Naomi Brooks never missed a required check-in without reason. Back on the highway, Mercer clipped his equipment back onto his belt and looked toward his patrol cruiser with quiet satisfaction, believing the encounter was finally moving in the direction he expected. He had no idea that at that exact moment, multiple phones across Virginia had begun ringing, and every conversation was leading toward the same lonely stretch of Interstate 95 where the truth was about to arrive long before sunrise. Naomi Brooks slowly pushed herself into a seated position on the damp shoulder of the highway, taking one careful breath before another. Rain continued to fall in, a steady rhythm, washing tiny streams of water across the asphalt as the flashing patrol lights reflected endlessly against the wet surface. She did not argue. She did not accuse. She simply remained composed, her eyes briefly lifting toward the overcast sky before settling once more on Officer Daniel Mercer. Years of federal training had taught her that panic clouded judgment, while patience often revealed more than confrontation ever could. Mercer believed the encounter had finally confirmed his suspicions. He walked back toward his cruiser with the confidence of someone convinced he had prevented a serious threat. Inside the patrol vehicle, he began entering notes into the computer terminal, carefully building a report that matched the version of events already forming in his mind. He never considered that every second spent writing those words allowed another timeline to unfold far beyond the highway. Deep inside Naomi's sport utility vehicle, beneath the locked security compartment hidden below the cargo floor, a compact encrypted communications unit remained active. Every scheduled confirmation had been missed. The secure device had automatically shifted into contingency status, transmitting only the smallest amount of protected data through channels unavailable to ordinary communication systems. It revealed no classified information, no identities, and no operational details. It transmitted only one undeniable fact. Special Agent Naomi Brooks had unexpectedly gone silent. In Washington, the atmosphere inside the Federal Operations Center had changed completely. The room that had been calm less than an hour earlier now moved with quiet urgency. Analysts compared travel logs, secure schedules, and communication records while supervisors spoke in measured voices that carried unmistakable authority. Nobody rushed, yet every decision happened faster than the one before it. A senior official studied Naomi's operational file one final time before looking across the conference table. "She has never failed a scheduled check-in," he said. "Assume there is a reason." Those few words immediately expanded the response. The Richmond field office received updated instructions. Virginia State Police Command acknowledged the federal request. Secure notifications reached multiple agencies whose names rarely appeared in public reports. None of the people receiving those calls yet understood the full picture, but every one of them recognized the seriousness of a missing federal communication during an active assignment. Back on the interstate, the young couple watching from the nearby gas station exchanged uncertain glances. The woman lowered her cell phone for the first time since recording had begun. "Something feels wrong," she whispered. Her boyfriend nodded slowly without taking his eyes off the distant patrol lights. "She never raised her voice," he answered quietly. Their words disappeared beneath the sound of passing trucks, yet they reflected what every witness had seen. Calm on one side, escalating suspicion on the other. Naomi remained silent for another long moment before speaking with the same controlled voice that had never changed throughout the encounter. "Officer Mercer," she said gently, "there are situations that become much more complicated than they first appear." He barely looked up from the computer screen. "Save it for later," he replied confidently. Naomi did not answer again. She simply watched another wave of rain sweep across the empty highway, knowing something he did not. Somewhere beyond the darkness, phones were still ringing. Conversations were connecting offices that almost never spoke directly to one another. The stop that Mercer believed belonged entirely to him was quietly becoming the concern of people whose authority reached far beyond the county line, and before the night was over, the first call from Washington would finally find its destination. The rain finally began to ease, leaving only a fine mist drifting above the pavement as dawn remained hidden beyond thick gray clouds. The flashing patrol lights still painted the shoulder of the interstate in restless waves of blue and red, but the atmosphere had quietly changed. It was no longer simply a traffic stop. It had become a moment balanced between two very different versions of the truth. Naomi Brooks stood once again after, assuring Officer Daniel Mercer that she was all right. Her jacket was damp, her hands remained visible, and her expression showed the same steady composure that had never left her since the encounter began. She glanced briefly toward her sport utility vehicle before returning her attention to Mercer. She knew exactly what rested beneath the secured cargo compartment. She also knew why it could not be revealed without proper authorization. Months of careful investigative work involving multiple federal agencies depended upon that decision. The operation had never been about a single arrest. It was about uncovering a network that stretched across state lines, following financial records instead of headlines, and documenting facts instead of assumptions. Every participant had accepted one difficult rule before the investigation ever began. If challenged unexpectedly, they would protect the mission first, even if doing so meant enduring uncomfortable situations without revealing their identities. Naomi had accepted that responsibility without hesitation because she understood something every experienced investigator eventually learned. Temporary misunderstanding could be repaired. A compromised investigation could not. Officer Mercer, however, saw only a driver who continued withholding information he believed he deserved. "You could have avoided all of this," he said, shaking his head. Naomi answered with quiet honesty. "Perhaps, but other people are depending on promises that I cannot break." Mercer dismissed the statement with a skeptical look, convinced it was simply another attempt to avoid answering his questions directly. Behind him, the computer inside his patrol cruiser emitted a soft notification tone. He glanced toward the screen but ignored it, assuming it was another routine update from dispatch. Moments later, the radio crackled again. Dispatch requested that he acknowledge an incoming priority communication. Mercer picked up the microphone with the confidence of someone expecting an ordinary instruction. "Unit 12 responding," he said. The dispatcher hesitated before speaking again, an unusual pause that immediately caught Naomi's attention. "Stand by for supervisory traffic," came the reply. Mercer frowned. Supervisors rarely interrupted routine roadside stops unless something significant had occurred elsewhere. Several long seconds passed. Even the highway seemed unusually quiet. Passing vehicles continued moving through the mist, their headlights stretching across the wet asphalt before disappearing into the darkness ahead. Naomi remained silent. She did not smile. She did not appear relieved. She simply listened. Hundreds of miles away, inside the Federal Operations Center, another secure conference line connected. Representatives from multiple offices had now confirmed the same location, the same highway, and the same interrupted timeline. One senior official spoke calmly into the secure line. "We have positive confirmation. Contact the responding supervisor immediately. Advise them that the individual involved is operating under federal authority connected to an active protected investigation. Preserve the scene and limit further action until federal personnel arrive." The instruction traveled through secure channels with remarkable speed. Back on Interstate 95, Mercer's patrol radio came alive once more, but this time the voice sounded noticeably different. It carried none of the casual tone heard during ordinary dispatch calls. Instead, every word was measured, deliberate, and unmistakably serious. "Officer Mercer," the supervisor said, "remain exactly where you are. We have received a priority notification from Washington regarding the individual involved in your stop. Do not take any additional action until I arrive." For the first time that night, the certainty on Mercer's face began to fade. Officer Daniel Mercer lowered the radio microphone without realizing that his grip had tightened around it. The confidence that had carried him through the entire encounter slowly gave way to uncertainty as the words from his supervisor echoed inside the quiet patrol cruiser. "Priority notification from Washington. Do not take any additional action." Those were not phrases officers heard during ordinary traffic stops. They belonged to situations that reached far beyond county lines and local. Procedure. Mercer stepped back onto the wet shoulder and looked toward Naomi Brooks. She had not changed her posture. She stood quietly beside her vehicle with rain resting on her jacket, her hands relaxed at her sides, and the same composed expression that had remained unchanged since the flashing lights first appeared behind her. She did not look victorious. She did not appear angry. She simply waited. Imagine standing there, knowing the truth would soon arrive, yet choosing patience instead of pride. That kind of restraint cannot be learned in a single day. It is built over years of discipline. Within minutes, another set of emergency lights appeared in the distance, approaching steadily through the mist. A marked supervisor vehicle pulled onto the shoulder, followed closely by two unmarked sport utility vehicles that carried no visible agency markings. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Conversations became quieter. Movements became more deliberate. Mercer's supervising lieutenant stepped out first, walked directly toward him, and spoke in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. The younger officer's expression changed with every sentence. He glanced toward Naomi, then back at his lieutenant, as though hoping he had misunderstood what was being said. The lieutenant walked toward Naomi with measured steps. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "I have been informed that federal representatives are on their way. Until they arrive, is there anything you require?" Naomi offered a polite nod. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I simply ask that the scene remain exactly as it is." He acknowledged the request without hesitation. Moments later, one of the unmarked vehicles received a secure call. The driver listened silently before handing the phone to the lieutenant. The conversation lasted less than a minute, yet everyone nearby sensed its importance. When the lieutenant returned, his demeanor had become even more formal. He looked directly at Mercer. "You need to know who you have been speaking with tonight," he said quietly. Mercer remained silent. "The individual involved is Special Agent Naomi Brooks of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She has been operating under federal authority as part of a protected investigation." The notification came directly through Washington. For several long seconds, only the sound of light rain filled the air. Mercer looked toward Naomi as if seeing her for the first time. Every calm answer, every measured movement, every respectful warning she had offered suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. She had never tried to win an argument. She had tried to prevent a mistake from becoming something much larger. Naomi met his eyes with quiet professionalism. "Officer," she said gently, "my identity was never meant to become the story tonight." Before Mercer could respond, another convoy of dark government vehicles appeared at the edge of the interstate, their headlights cutting through the fading mist. The people stepping out wore no dramatic expressions and made no loud announcements. They moved with the quiet confidence of professionals who understood exactly why they had been called. In that moment, everyone on the shoulder of Interstate 95 realized the night had never been about an ordinary traffic stop. It had always been part of a much larger story, and Washington had finally arrived to tell the rest of it. The arrival of the federal convoy changed the atmosphere without a single raised voice. Men and women in plain business attire stepped onto the shoulder with calm precision, each carrying the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly why they had been called. No one rushed. No one tried to dominate the scene. Their presence alone shifted the balance of authority. One senior federal official approached Naomi Brooks first. "Agent Brooks," he said, offering a respectful nod, "we are glad you are safe." Naomi returned the greeting with the same composed professionalism she had shown throughout the night. "Thank you. The investigation remains secure." Those 5 words immediately eased the concern visible on several faces. The operation that had occupied months of careful planning had not been compromised. That mattered more than anyone outside the small federal team could fully appreciate. The official then turned toward the local command staff. "Our priority now is preserving every detail exactly as it occurred," he explained. "Please ensure that all recordings, radio traffic, dispatch logs, and body camera files are retained according to standard procedure." The request was delivered politely, yet everyone understood it carried the full weight of federal authority. The supervising lieutenant acknowledged the instruction without hesitation. Officer Daniel Mercer remained unusually quiet. Only an hour earlier, he had believed he understood everything unfolding before him. Now he realized how little of the larger picture he had actually seen. He replayed the conversation in his mind, remembering every calm response Naomi had given, every opportunity she had offered for the encounter to end peacefully, and every warning she had expressed without ever revealing the reason behind it. None of those moments had sounded threatening at the time. They sounded different now. Imagine discovering that the person you underestimated had spent the entire encounter protecting responsibilities you never even knew existed. Sometimes the greatest display of authority is not announcing it at all. A federal investigator quietly documented the condition of the scene, while another spoke with the witnesses who had remained nearby. The young couple from the gas station voluntarily shared the cell phone recording they had captured from a distance. They explained that Naomi had remained respectful from beginning to end and had never attempted to flee or escalate the encounter. Their statement became only one part of a much larger record, but every detail helped preserve an accurate timeline. Naomi finally walked toward the rear of her sport utility vehicle. With authorization from the federal team now present, she unlocked the concealed security compartment beneath the cargo floor. Inside rested a protected case secured with multiple authentication safeguards. She opened it carefully and removed her federal credentials, presenting them first to the supervising lieutenant before returning them to the case. No dramatic speech followed. None was necessary. The identification spoke for itself. The lieutenant nodded respectfully before addressing his own personnel. "From this point forward," he said, "everyone will fully cooperate with the federal review." Mercer listened without interrupting. His shoulders seemed heavier than before, not because someone had humiliated him, but because certainty had given way to reflection. The rain had completely stopped by then, and the first faint light of morning began to break through the clouds above Interstate 95. As the flashing patrol lights slowly faded against the growing daylight, it became clear that the most important lesson from the night had never been about hidden credentials or arriving federal vehicles. It had been about the danger of allowing assumptions to replace patience, because once assumptions take control, even ordinary decisions can echo far beyond the place where they began. Morning sunlight slowly broke through the clouds above Interstate 95, replacing the restless flashes of emergency lights with the quiet glow of a new day. The highway that had witnessed confusion only hours earlier now felt almost ordinary again. Traffic flowed steadily. The rain had stopped. The last federal vehicles prepared to leave after completing the initial documentation required to protect both the investigation and the integrity of every record collected during the night. Naomi Brooks stood beside her sport utility vehicle, speaking briefly with the senior federal official before securing her credentials once again inside the protected case. There was no celebration waiting for her. There was another assignment, another report, and another responsibility that would continue long after the roadside encounter became part of an official file. That was the reality of public service. Most victories were invisible, and the greatest successes were often the ones the public never fully understood. Officer Daniel Mercer remained near his patrol cruiser, watching quietly as events unfolded around him. The certainty that had guided his decisions throughout the night had been replaced by something much more valuable: reflection. His supervising lieutenant approached and spoke calmly, explaining that the incident would receive a complete administrative review according to established procedures. Every recording would be examined. Every report would be compared with the available evidence. Every decision would be evaluated fairly. Accountability was not about humiliation. It was about preserving public trust. Mercer nodded silently. For the first time since the stop had begun, he asked no questions. He simply listened. Imagine how different every encounter would become if assumptions waited for facts instead of racing ahead of them. A badge carries authority, but character determines how that authority is used. Naomi walked toward her vehicle before pausing one final time. She looked at Mercer with neither anger nor satisfaction. "Officer," she said gently, "every person you stop has a story you cannot see. Sometimes the most important part of your job is giving that story enough time to reveal itself." Mercer lowered his eyes for a moment before answering quietly. "I understand that now." They were simple words, but they carried more weight than any argument that could have happened hours earlier. Nearby, the young couple who had remained as witnesses finally returned to their own vehicle. Before leaving, the woman looked back one last time and whispered, "I hope people remember what really mattered." Her boyfriend nodded. "Not who had more power," he replied, "who chose to keep their dignity." The federal convoy departed first, disappearing into the morning traffic without drawing attention to itself. Naomi followed a few minutes later, merging onto the interstate and continuing the mission that had been interrupted but never defeated. Behind her, local officers resumed their normal patrols, carrying with them a reminder that professionalism begins long before credentials are revealed. Some lessons arrive through training. Others arrive through experience. The most lasting ones arrive through humility. Long after the reports are filed and the headlines fade, what remains is the quiet truth that justice depends not only on laws, but also on the willingness to see another human being without prejudice, without assumption, and without forgetting that respect costs nothing while its absence can cost far more than anyone expects. He believed authority came from the badge on his chest. She understood that true authority begins with integrity. And on that quiet Virginia morning, the difference between those two ideas became a lesson that neither of them would ever forget.